If history has proven anything, it's that nothing lasts forever, and eventually, it can feel like nothing is sacred. Empires come to an end, monoliths and statues and revered edifices are torn down or crumble with age, and things that were once held in high esteem are just a distant memory. And that's probably how it's going to feel when a game like Halo ends up on PlayStation. And it may seem a bit melodramatic to talk about it this way, but it truly represents the end of an era. Seeing games like Hi-Fi Rush or Sea of Thieves go to PlayStation just felt like early rumblings of change, but for many, Halo is more than a game. It's an icon, it's a cherished memory, it's a touch point that got many people into console gaming or just gaming in general, and Master Chief essentially became Xbox's mascot. Like Mario for Nintendo, a character can transcend the games that they're in and become the ambassador for the brand. And while many people expected more and more Xbox games to jump to other platforms, Halo felt untouchable to some. Like the last remaining sacred vessel in the Temple of Xbox, surely it would remain behind the glass case of exclusivity. But in just 12 months, we went from rumors about games like Indiana Jones and Starfield to now hearing that the king himself will land in enemy territory. So what does this mean for the future? What does this mean for the PS5 Pro or the impending Nintendo Switch 2? And why does the timing of hearing about this feel like a planned leak? Well, we're going to get into that in this video, so be sure to hit like and subscribe and check out the live discussion that followed this upload. Xbox has a pattern of getting the bad news out of the way before they have an event. When they knew they were going to have to put Starfield in a direct for their summer showcase, they also needed to announce that it was coming out in September instead of the first half of 2023. Commonly, they've had delay announcements or things like the Xbox podcast happen right before they move into marketing pushes and big events, and it honestly makes sense. In the wake of your event, your trailers or exciting reveals, you don't want to put a damper on that by having to say that a long-awaited game's been delayed or some other form of bad news. And since we know Xbox likes to use the press and podcasters and YouTubers to soften the blow of bad news, it's hard for this whole situation to not make my spidey sense tingle just a little bit. The day after they announced the date of their next Xbox Developer Direct, we have rumors and insiders making waves, and we've got headlines stating that Halo and Gears of War are heading to PS5 and the Nintendo Switch 2. This seems like awfully convenient timing. Basically, let the Xbox loyal know that 2025 is going to have some unwelcome developments, but be sure to do it before the Developer Direct, where you can excite them again with South of Midnight and Doom the Dark Ages. And look, I actually applaud the effort here. It's very likely not something that Phil Spencer or other heads of Xbox wanted to have happen. You can tell after the Bethesda acquisition that Phil and the team really wanted to make another push for exclusives. But as I said, nothing is sacred, and the almighty dollar is driving Satya and Microsoft to chart a very different course, not just for Xbox, but for long-standing pieces of Xbox property like Halo and Gears of War. Which leads to a very natural question. What will all of this look like going forward? If there was one thing long-standing Xbox fans could still cling to, it was the staggered release. Indiana Jones is going to the PlayStation 5, sure, but at least Xbox and Game Pass got it first. When discussing this with Variety, Matt Booty had a few answers that seemed somewhat vague and non-committal. First, he said that, quote, "We are very much making the exclusivity and windowing decisions on a game-by-game basis, and each of our studios is in a little bit of a different position." But then he went on to say that there's also the production timeline on a game, so the decision on spacing comes there first. We want to make sure there's a great experience for our Xbox players, and then the gap between when it becomes available on PlayStation is as much a production decision as it is anything else. You notice that he said the decision on spacing comes first to the production timeline, and then concludes that Indiana Jones coming late to PlayStation was equal parts about production of the game. Essentially, what he's saying is that exclusivity is not driven by making the Xbox platform more appealing or better. That's only a small part of the equation now, and probably not even there anymore. What I conclude from this is a few things. First, a staggered release date is not the ideal given the goal of Xbox right now. It's merely the outcome of production timelines. In other words, they are not instructing studios to develop in a way that ensures Xbox gets a game first. If it happens, it happens. Second, Given what we know about game sales, I think it's safe to conclude that the staggered release will become less and less common as time goes on. It's far more effective to have your game land day and date everywhere. Now, this isn't the most effective when it comes to game quality because it spreads your bandwidth pretty far, but it certainly is the best way to generate a maximum amount of sales. Take Starfield as an example. If you look at the history of Bethesda games on PlayStation, Fallout 4 sold incredibly well on the PlayStation platform. Starfield would have very likely seen a strong launch week on the PS5. But now the game's out, the user reviews are not great with respect to overall score, and it'll very likely see diminished sales on the PS5 if and when it ever arrives. And that's not even considering how some consumers have a general distaste for getting games quote-unquote late. So, if one of the last bastions of reverence for the Xbox platform was the staggered release or the timed exclusive, it too will likely crack and wither and fade from sight. As I said from the outset, nothing is sacred for Xbox anymore, and that will end up being very apparent when the PS5 Pro enters the picture. The PS5 Pro will continue to be an interesting element in the console market equation, especially after what happened with Black Ops 6. In case you missed it, they enhanced Black Ops 6 for the PS5 Pro, and they even worked with Sony to make a new anti-lag VRR technology. So this means a first-party studio wasn't just enhancing a game for the Pro, but actively working with PlayStation to make it as good as possible. It isn't hard to imagine a future where this trend continues. Developers have proven time and time again that if you give them new tech or more power, they will tap into it. Now, sometimes they do this a bit too much, and it can hurt the performance of a game. We saw this with a few games pushing out PS5 Pro patches a little too quickly. Even the Black Ops 6 devs said they had learned how to better optimize and denoise some of the PSSR issues that other games were encountering. So the next mainline Halo game could very likely be on the PS5 Pro with better performance or features that you don't even see on the Xbox console. But it's like I said, nothing is sacred. Moving Halo to PlayStation means all bets are off. All prior commitments and boundaries have eroded and disappeared. But there's another player in the room that makes this even more complicated. The market saturation of the Nintendo Switch is something even some of the biggest publishers didn't anticipate. Bobby Kotick admitted to making a bad judgment call when it came to the first Nintendo Switch. That tells me you will see the Switch 2 treated with a lot more interest. But what does a future look like when a device at the power of the Switch 2 comes to market and it has games like Halo landing on it? The last 4 years have seen the Xbox Series S as a challenge for developers, and while third-party developers have attempted to be diplomatic about the conversation, it's highly unlikely that all of the Xbox first-party studios have faced zero challenges with the Xbox Series S. So the Switch 2 could create a similar challenge. It's one thing for Nintendo to self-inflict their hardware limitations so their own property and games come out and are limited. It's entirely different when third-party developers have to figure it out. Take Hogwarts Legacy as an example. It took 9 months for it to land on the Nintendo Switch after the initial release date, and it actually wasn't even handled by the developers. A porting company known as Shiver is the one who handled it. So if Xbox wants to bring its new mainline titles to the Switch 2, they may need a similar solution. Asking all of your developers to start building future games not just for the litany of hardware configurations on PC, but also the Series S, the Series X, the PS5, the PS5 Pro, and then when you throw the Switch 2 in the mix, it could feel like trying to swallow an elephant. Are any of these studios up to the task? Does anybody have experience making games for such a broad amount of hardware? The list of games that have made the jump over to the Switch from PC and consoles is not a long list, and many of them didn't get the greatest reviews. The Switch 2 is not being rumored to be a powerhouse. It sounds like a nice jump from the previous model, specifically for first-party games like Mario, Zelda, and Metroid. To say this another way, I don't think the Switch 2 is going to become anybody's primary gaming device if you're looking for big next-gen third-party games, which calls into question what priority it will have for a company like Xbox. Games like Minecraft and Call of Duty generate a ton of money from Microsoft, but they're very different games with respect to performance and even target audience. In other words, developing and putting games everywhere might not be as glorious and as profitable as many gamers would have you believe, which leads to a potentially unknown future. When I was looking for famous quotes in the vein of nothing is sacred, I came across a rather bleak one. Philip Reif, an American sociologist, famously said, "Where there is nothing sacred, there is nothing." And while he was viewing things from a more religious perspective, it's hard not to see it applying here. If you remove the sacred center of anything, it quickly becomes untethered and difficult to define. And that has certainly happened with Xbox. Calling TVs, tablets, and cell phones an Xbox was seemingly just the beginning. When you tear down the very edifice that drew many gamers to the Xbox brand, it can almost feel like an existential crisis for some gamers. If everything is an Xbox, then nothing really is. If Halo is everywhere, then it becomes just another game, absorbed into the ether of the gaming industry machine. And that isn't even considering what this sort of evolution can do to game quality. Quantity can certainly be the enemy of quality, and having your studios make games for not just 2 to 3 platforms, but now 4 to 5, well, that could be a bridge too far. So while elements of this future remain unknown, one thing is abundantly clear. Given enough time, even the most sacred things can be toppled and torn down. And the question is, will something better be built in its place, or will it just be one more dust-covered rubble heap for history to forget? I, for one, hope they pull it off, but conventional wisdom tells me not to get my hopes up. But those are just my thoughts, and I'd love to hear yours. You can leave a comment below or follow the video to a live stream that'll hit the card here. I also pin a comment below with a link to that live stream. And as always, if you like this video, please remember to hit like, share, and subscribe.